You are standing in a circle of people and one man will not stop talking. He is louder than everyone else. He has decided, somewhere in the last few minutes, that his voice should count for more than yours. You are watching the other faces in the circle, waiting to see what they do about him. For most of the time your species has existed, that man was the central political problem your ancestors had to solve. What do you do about someone who has decided he is above you? Your answer to that question is where democracy comes from. It arrived tens of thousands of years before anyone in Athens carved the word into stone. Here is the version you were taught. Around 500 BCE, a few clever Greeks looked at the tyrants around them, had an idea, and built rule by the people out of nothing. One flash of genius in one city, and the rest of the world eventually copied it. That version has the order of events reversed.
To see why, go back to the only political system your ancestors knew for 300,000 years, and meet an anthropologist named Christopher Boehm. In 1999, Boehm published a survey of the ethnographic record of dozens of mobile hunting and gathering societies, groups scattered across 4 continents and written up over a century and a half by missionaries, traders, colonial officers, and anthropologists who agreed with each other about almost nothing else. And he went through all of it, looking for the answer to a single question. Who was in charge? Across society after society, the answer came back the same: nobody. Not because these were gentle people, and not because ambition had somehow been bred out of them. Ambitious men existed in every one of those groups. They were never allowed to win. Boehm gave the pattern a name: reverse dominance hierarchy. In a chimpanzee troop, the strongest individual dominates everyone beneath him. In a human foraging band, the many coordinate to hold down anyone who starts to rise. The group is the alpha. How does a camp of 30 people with no police and no written law hold down a strong man? It talks about him. Gossip, ridicule, refusing to cooperate, walking out of camp before dawn, ignoring an order until it dissolves into embarrassment. In the rare cases where nothing worked, expulsion, or an execution carried out by consensus so that no single person carried the blame. Those are the oldest political tools you own. Richard Lee watched the machinery running in real time. Beginning in 1963, he lived with the Zhou/Hoansi in the Kalahari desert, and one habit confused him for months. When a hunter came back to camp with a large, fat animal, everyone insulted it. They called the kills scrawny. They complained about walking that far for a bag of bones. The hunter, who had just fed the entire camp, was expected to agree with them and describe his own animal as worthless.
Lee eventually got the full treatment himself. He spent his own money on an enormous black ox for the Christmas feast, proud of it, and one person after another came to him privately to say the animal was a bag of bones and the camp would go home hungry. He worried about it for days. The ox turned out to be thick with fat. When he finally asked why, the explanation was blunt. A man who kills a lot of meat starts to think of himself as a chief, and a chief starts to think of other people as servants. So the camp takes the pride and leaves him the meat. That is a constitutional limit, delivered as a joke. The Zhou/Hoansi went further than mockery. The person who divided the meat was not the hunter at all, but the owner of the arrow that had brought the animal down. And arrows moved constantly between people as gifts, passing between friends, in-laws, wives, and old men who had stopped hunting years before. Which meant that a gifted young hunter could feed the camp for a month and never once be the man standing over the carcass handing out the food. Credit rotated. The whole arrangement converted skill into meat while stopping it from becoming authority. There is no document anywhere in that system, no vote and no office. It still does the one thing a constitution exists to do. It limits the strong. The debating chamber was the fire. Polly Wiessner recorded and analyzed Zhou/Hoansi conversations and published the results in 2014, and she found the day split cleanly in two. Daylight talk was practical and sharp. Complaints, criticism, arguments over land, over food, over who had behaved badly. Firelight talk turned to stories, to people far away, to the dead, to singing. The group corrected its members by day and reminded itself who it was by night. Reconstruct a day inside that system. You wake in a camp of about 30 people. Everyone here is a relative or an in-law. There is no building and no storehouse. Everything you own, you can carry, and most of it you will give away within the year, because possessions that pile up make you the target of the same resentment you have spent your life learning to avoid. By midday, a man returns with a large antelope. You are hungry. You are delighted. You walk out to meet him and tell him, with a flat face, that you have never seen such a pathetic animal in your life. He agrees and apologizes for wasting your afternoon. Nobody in the camp finds this strange. He will eat the same share as you. That evening, a different man gives an order. He tells people where to move camp tomorrow in the voice of someone who expects to be obeyed.
Nobody argues with him. Nobody confronts him.
The conversation moves on. By morning, 3 families have walked in the other direction, and he finds around noon that he is walking alone. That is what politics looked like for most of the time your species has existed. Nobody designed it. It ran on gossip, on jokes, on who was willing to sit next to whom, and on the fact that anyone could leave. What changed? Which flips the question you started with. Nobody needs to explain democracy. Somebody needs to explain the king. That invention required one thing: storage. Once people began farming, grain could be piled up, sealed, counted, and defended, and a pile of grain does something a shared antelope never could. It waits.
Kent Flannery and Joyce traced the consequences across the ancient world in a book published in 2012, following communities that had spent thousands of years flattening their own ambitious men and watching them, over the course of a few thousand more, begin to build a larger house for one family, and then a temple that only some people could enter, and then a palace. You could no longer walk away because your food sat in the ground and would not be ready for months. You could no longer mock the powerful man because he had stopped needing your cooperation. He had a surplus, and men who ate from it. The oldest human political system collapsed the moment leaving became impossible. Which brings you, finally, to Athens. In 508 BCE, a politician named Cleisthenes rebuilt the city from the inside. He broke up the old family power blocks and reassigned every citizen to a local unit called a deme. A council of 500 set the agenda. The assembly met outdoors on a hill called the Pnyx, where any citizen could stand up and speak. The strangest detail is the one modern voters find hardest to accept. Most Athenian officials were never elected. They were drawn at random. Excavators in the Athenian Agora recovered slabs of stone called kleroteria, allotment machines, and the machine is worth picturing properly because it was a slotted grid cut into the face of the stone into which citizens inserted small bronze identity tokens, column by column, while black and white balls dropped one at a time through a tube fixed to the side, each ball accepting or rejecting an entire horizontal row of men at once. Public office by lottery, cut into stone, standing in a public square. Aristotle later set out the logic plainly. Selection by lot was democratic. Election was oligarchic. Elections are won by the wealthy, the famous, and the persuasive. And handing power to the most persuasive man in the room is how you manufacture a big man. When someone rose too high anyway, Athens kept a second tool. Once a year, citizens could scratch a name onto a broken piece of pottery, an ostrakon, and the man who collected the most shards left the city for 10 years. Thousands of those shards have come out of Athenian soil. The largest deposit, in the Kerameikos cemetery, ran to something like 8,000 of them. But the most revealing find is smaller.
In 1937, in a well on the northern slope of the Acropolis, excavators pulled out around 190 ostraca, every one of them carrying the name of Themistocles. And when the handwriting was studied, it turned out that only about 14 hands had cut the whole batch. Whether that was a conspiracy is genuinely unclear. Prepared shards would also have been useful to voters who could not write. Either way, somebody had made them in advance, and somebody had made a lot of them. Now look at what the tool actually is. A city of tens of thousands of people with a navy and a written legal code defending itself against ambitious men by writing their names down and pushing them out of the group. That is the Kalahari at scale. Boehm's reverse dominance hierarchy written on pottery. And Athens was not even first. In Ukraine, at sites like Nebelivka, John Chapman and Biserka Gajdarska have excavated settlements from around 4000 BCE laid out in vast concentric rings of houses with assembly buildings spread evenly through every neighborhood. No palace, no royal district. David Graeber and David Wengrow built much of their 2021 book on sites like these, arguing that large, complex, self-governing human societies ran for millennia with nobody sitting on top of them, and that we walked past the evidence because we were searching for thrones.
That argument is not settled, and you should know that before you repeat it. Plenty of archaeologists think Graeber and Wengrow pushed the evidence harder than it will go. The Ukrainian megasites in particular may never have held their full population at one time. Houses were built, burned, and rebuilt across centuries, and a plan that looks like a city of 10,000 on paper may have been a place that a few hundred people occupied in rotation. The fight over that is ongoing. But the skeptics and the enthusiasts agree on the part that matters here. Nobody has found the palace. The timeline runs the other way around. Humans invented kings, recently and briefly. Democracy is what your species does whenever it manages to climb back to normal, which means the instincts you use every week are older than any parliament. When a manager takes credit for your team's work and the group chat lights up at 11 at night, that is the antelope being insulted. When a powerful person's reputation collapses under 1 week of collective ridicule, that is a coalition of the weak doing what coalitions of the weak have always done. And when you quietly stop cooperating with someone who has started issuing orders, without ever saying so out loud, without a meeting, without a decision anybody could point to afterwards, you are reaching for a tool older than writing. You inherited that. Nobody taught it to you. It still runs on the same 2 conditions it always did. The group has to be able to talk to each other honestly, and leaving has to stay possible. Remove either one and the loudest man wins. That has been true in a camp of 30 and in a city of 30,000. So look at the circle again. You are standing with a group of people, and one man will not stop talking. Nobody has handed you a title or a weapon. You have your face, your voice, and the people standing beside you. That has been enough before. It is the oldest government on earth.